Thought a lot about leaving recently. Maybe jumping ship to the UK or to Canada. I can't exactly afford a drastic move like that, but I can't really afford the tariff-induced nosedive that the US economy is taking either. I keep asking myself, would I have ran from Italy in the 1920s or Germany in the 1930s? My art covers a pretty broad range of topics. My first serious sculptures were about my personal issues, things like grief, anxiety, and loneliness. And as I worked through those issues, my concerns broadened beyond myself. I made art about war, climate change, and religion. Art is my way of coping, of processing, and now more than ever, of advocating for the ideals that are most important to me. I'm a very idealistic person. It's where I draw my meaning and purpose. It's why I don't want to run, I want to fight. Can fascism be fought with art? It seems a bit ludicrous on its face. The paradoxical beauty of idealism is in its detachment from reality. An unattainable goal can inspire resounding truth and beauty far beyond the grasp of the pragmatists, the pessimists, and the nihilists. Anyways, here's my lament for America's rapid descent into fascism, created out of balloons. My ode to a falling star. This project started when The Locker Room in New York City asked me to be part of their group show, Inflation. My goal was to encapsulate and visualize the despair of witnessing Trump's administration cross small Rubicon after small Rubicon on their march towards authoritarianism. I first envisioned this blend of the cast from heaven and banished from Eden motifs with this figure falling from the sky. The silly little guys flying around are ambiguously both angel and demon, a stand-in for the disinterested non-voters and those willing to watch it all burn as long as it means their side wins. I extended the design vertically, adding a section that portrays the more longer-lasting somber effects of the administration's dismantling of our most important public institutions. The technique for these impeds started when I was creating The Long Night Takes Its Hold, and I really wanted to push the expressiveness I could get out of this little girl's head. I used wire to inset a shape into a round balloon for the mouth, and it worked well enough that I wanted to try to use that technique in even more places in a single head. I used pliers to bend the wire, and it was really important to use a blanket underneath the pliers in order to prevent scraping and adding burrs that could pop the balloon. These little hooks in the wire were important to serve as anchor points when wrapping with the 260 from the outside. As an extra safeguard, I threaded a 160 balloon over the wire and closed off the shape with a bit of heat shrink tubing. Then it was just a matter of popping all my shapes into their respective balloon colors and sucking out all the air. For this project, I needed to make a whole bunch of different coins and rings out of the balloons to use as dimples and pockmarks in the skin, as well as pupils and nostrils. It's a simple matter of blowing up the balloon and squeezing it onto the tube, letting the air out, and rolling it back up. I brought a whole bunch of different tubes with me to make any size that I would need. With all the facial elements completed, it was time to get some sleep to prepare for a long day of building on site at the gallery. So, let's talk about high float. High float is a liquid with this glue-like consistency you put inside the balloon to coat the inside, and it prevents the air from leaking out, allowing the sculptures to last longer. The original plan was to have the display up for an entire week, and I wanted it to look good throughout. This was my first time using high float in a display, and it was a big learning experience. It helped some, and it really made it a pain in the ass in other areas, but I'm glad I tried it out because I've learned a lot and know how to use it better in the future. I was originally using it for every balloon in the tree, but quickly changed my mind when I realized just how many balloons this tree was going to take. It wasn't a big loss, however, as the balloons would all shrink evenly with this technique that I was using, and it actually ended up aging very well without the high float. The bristlecone pine was my primary inspiration for the look of the tree. In order to keep the shape of the tree stable when so many long balloons were wrapped around it in that flowing motion, I had to use a double X-weave, which is just a standard X-weave but with 2 layers instead of 1. Despite the added strength that the double X-weave provided, I still needed a rod to support the shape of the circular opening. At some point I decided to do away with the idea of the figure sitting at the base of the tree, and instead went with 2 desiccated looking hands poking out of the hollow in the tree. I really love using balloon weaving for creating large structures like this because the longer amount of time and the repetitive tasks allows you to fall into this flow state that's very artistically satisfying for me. When twisting for these long stretches of time, 8, 10, 12, 14 hours, it's really important to keep spirits up with some good music, and maybe snack on a balloon or 2 as a treat. An organic design like this really comes down to feeling, so it's important to keep taking steps back and listen to your gut to tell you where it needs to go. For the texture in the tree, I outlined the major flow lines with this over-under spiral pattern, and then it was just a matter of filling in the gaps with 360s, 260s, and 160s. I've been really spoiled with the beautiful amount of variety in earth tones that Calisan has put out recently. Their balloons are on the tougher side, probably even thicker than Sempertex, which is my preferred style of balloon, but man did it have my hands aching after 500 plus balloons to create this tree. If I did this again, I would definitely high float the tips of the branches, because those shrank at a noticeable rate compared with the rest of the tree.
Pretty discouraged right now. I've been working all day and have not made the progress I wanted to, but the time hasn't been wasted because I've learned a lot. I've learned what not to do, and I've learned best practices and techniques for the things that I'm doing. So any future builds, I'm going to go into it with some valuable knowledge that I had to spend this difficult time here earning. So
it's day 3 and we're creating our little cherub demons. First step is to pop the eyes and mouth into the 17-inch balloon. I'm starting with the blue because his puckered mouth is going to be on the outside, not using the inset technique. This tool here is a goat castrator, but it's actually a common tool in the industry for stretching balloon nozzles and punishing unruly kids. The puff-inflated rings are important to keep a small ridge around the eyes and keep the wire from pressing against the outer balloon. This is sort of a reimagining of Matt Falloon's Cabbage Patch Kids concept. If this look intrigues you, I'd suggest searching out his tutorials. But I wanted to create something that was more cartoony in a two-dimensional way. First attempt was a bust because the eye openings were too small and at the wrong angle. You really got to be careful how hard you wrap the 260 around the outside. This was by far the most frustrating day, with so much trial and error, the worst of which was yet to come. Once I'm happy with the size and placement of the eyes, it's just a matter of flipping it inside out, shoving our little bits in there, and blowing up another balloon on the inside. I want to also give a shout out to Juho Hokkanen for inspiring me to use more ring insets, which is how I did the nostrils for these guys. If you'd like to learn how to do it, Juho has some tutorials out there, but we're essentially just putting a slightly smaller ring on the outside into a slightly larger ring that's on the inside. Time for our little green guy. And here's where we start having to wrap our 260 around those little hooks in the wire that we made. That allows for more irregular shapes other than the circle or oval that 260 is going to make when you wrap it around your inset object. Flipping your main balloon inside out becomes exponentially more difficult the more stuff you add inside, especially with these flat wire shapes that like to flip around and catch on each other. The clay sculpting tool was useful for cleaning up those edges. His tongue is just a cut-up piece of a balloon. This purple guy was going to be the most difficult one. Its eyes and mouth were so much bigger than the others, which made it so much more difficult to flip it inside out when the time came. Attempt 1, I didn't have the eyes in the right angle, had to try again. Attempt 2 looked a little better, but as I was adjusting the puff-inflated rings around the mouth, it popped. For the first, but definitely not the last time. This head ended up popping on me, I think 7 or 8 times. On top of the flip inside out being troublesome, these nostrils gave me way more trouble, just as my hands were really running out of energy. With the heads all complete, it was time for the bodies. This was a distortion with one 260 loop and 6 different 5-inch rounds. So distortion is the technique where you put several different size balloons inside of a larger balloon to create a unique shape. It's well known that high float doesn't pair particularly well with distortion because in order for high float to work, the liquid in it needs to evaporate, which can't happen when there's several layers between it and the outside. The heads didn't really have this problem. I suspect it's because it was just a single round balloon on the inside pressed up against another round balloon, and the 2 balloons acted as a single membrane, allowing for more evaporation. The bodies were high floated too, but that didn't really stop the air from leaking out of the inner balloons and puffing the outer balloon up, but I still think it helped in terms of longevity, which was good because we ended up keeping the display up through the rest of the month. I made the basic shape of these limbs out of 360s, and then brute forced them into 12-inch rounds, a method I do not recommend as it is extremely physically demanding. I was pretty thoroughly exhausted at the end there and was dealing with some pretty nasty blisters. The hands and feet were a valuable learning opportunity for me because these were the most important parts to be high floated, as they were made out of 160s, which naturally deflate a lot quicker than the other balloon sizes. The design that came most naturally to me was a really bad fit, because breaking off and reattaching balloons while there's high float inside is a horribly sticky, slippery mess. All I needed to do to rework the design, however, was make the entire hand or foot in one continuous unbroken line. A method I carried forward with the design for the wings. Took way longer than I'd hoped to create these guys, but even with all the prototyping that I had done, these were all very new concepts and I was still figuring out a lot on the fly. And with that, day 3 was finally over. Day 4 started strong with help from New York balloon artist Dave Bren and new balloon friend Zoe, who both helped me create the clouds. This naked torso was another huge speed bump for the process. It took so many iterations to find something I was remotely happy with. It was really frustrating because I had done this before, but I just could not replicate my results, and I think maybe the time crunch and the exhaustion was starting to wear on me. Because of that time crunch, the documentation and the camera angles are a little bit spottier than the other 2 days. I started with the length of 160 for the jaw, and this 2 bubble piece made up the mouth. I jammed the nose in there and used a length of 360 for the cheekbones, which I twisted in half once I got it inside the balloon. A 160 for the brow, a piece of 360 to push the mouth forward, throw in a bunch of raisins, and we're done. I kept the hair fairly simple with a bridge of 260 pinch twists going from one ear to the other, and an up and down pattern filling out the back of the head. I had taken the time before the build started to prototype this head thoroughly, so it went much smoother than the body. I went with the Rupert Appleyard style head for our embodiment of fascism here. Adding the sideburns and graying hair gave him a lot of character. I had a hard deadline of 9 a.m. the next morning to get everything finished, so sadly a couple things ended up happening off camera, including weaving the black ooze into the tree, creating the bony hands, and stringing everything up where it belongs. Day 3 had me working for 24 hours straight to get this all done, plus another couple of hours to clean up the gallery. Everything came together in the end, and while there was a lot of stumbling blocks and speed bumps with the new techniques that I was using, I am happy with the result, and I think it made for a really impactful gallery opening.
When I was in New York working on this art, I drove past a large protest in the New York Supreme Court. My New York friends were there, and I talked to them later that week about how we could harmonize our message and utilize balloons in marches and demonstrations. Because right now, we need art that moves people to action. I hope you feel inspired to take action, to fight for your ideals, through art, through voting, through protest. Stay safe.
Thank you so much for watching. I plan to do more projects like this in the future, so like and subscribe so you don't miss that. And if you appreciate the work I do, you can support me on Patreon. Patrons get early access to video content like this, as well as other behind the scenes content. I'll see you in the next one.